NFL Week 14 betting market outlook. Week 13 was lukewarm from a live betting performance perspective. Favorites went 10-4-1 ATS, 13-1-1 straight up. And that's just not the type of volatility that's going to be conducive to generating a nice, juicy, profitable P&L from live betting. And the outcome was a lot of the teams that we bet on to come back or betting on some volatility, a lot of it just didn't materialize. We were very close in several, which made it very frustrating. And so it wasn't a bad weekend, but definitely wasn't a good weekend. Basically flattish.
Yeah, I bet New Orleans plus 3.5 pretty early, which made up for what would have been among the most sour finishes of any game. The Saints have put me on a crazy tilt. I had Saints minus 2.5 and Andy Dalton 220 passing yards at plus 450. And the passing yards hit, and I just wrote it off as, okay, this is done. The Saints are going to win this. And then for Brady to come back and Dennis Allen punting on 4th and 1 from the 43, the whole way it ended just had me on such tilt. But that was a tough way to finish. We've almost become so accustomed to live betting success. It's a good reminder that you can't always win.
Yeah, and in fact, I do take away the weekend as generally a W, given the fact that favorites performed so well, and there wasn't nearly the same volatility that we typically experience on a week-to-week basis. The fact that we didn't get our faces ripped off is actually quite a W. I do want to give you a shout out is one of the things you post every Sunday morning is these moonshot bets, these super juicy SGPs, and you don't brag about them nearly as much as you should. But yet another plus 1,500 SGP cashes. You only need like a handful of those to cash in a whole season to be profitable, assuming you're not like just a raging degenerate elsewhere.
Yeah. And
you've already cashed like 5-6 of these on the season.
Yeah, it was plus 1872. It was Hurts, 300 passing yards, Sanders under 58.5. The Eagles money line, I do want to take a point here, given the Twitter conversation from this week about same game parlays in general. If you approach it as a particular market where you can tell one story, and I outlined very clearly what that story was. The Eagles forced teams to pass more than anyone else. The Eagles are very adaptable in their run-pass ratios. They're going to pass. Jalen Hurts' price is for his season-long average. What happens if they just pass the ball? And the Titans' pass defense isn't particularly good. And I built that story. I said Miles Sanders is not going to run for as many yards as his season average. Jalen Hurts is going to go over his passing yards, and the Eagles are going to have success. And that was the story. And I got it at plus 18-1. And that's what same-game parlays are valuable for. Right? It's not just like this money-sucking, avoid at all costs. No, it has value if you use it for the right purposes.
And that's why I don't want to stir up a storm or anything, but it's like those BetStamp, the Hammer, this incestual group out there, they're the old guard of sports betting. And they continue to really hold on to these sports betting maxims of antiquity that are no longer necessarily relevant or maybe not relevant, but certainly don't hold the same strength in its argument in today's betting environment. Just around the pre-game betting too.
Yeah.
And about CLV and betting early, like regardless, like you're making a bet on top of a bet. You're not even just betting on the team, you're betting on which direction the line's going to move. You're doing it with low conviction, you're doing it with low information. That is not a long-term positive EV bet unless you are a pro bettor and you are looking at all these lines and everything moving on a tick-by-tick basis, which most people don't. We don't.
No, for sure not. New information comes at us all the time. For a game that is constantly changing, you need to adapt and respond to new information. And what was true 10 years ago, what was true 5 years ago, what was true in week 3 might be different, right? Like you always need to build in new information and look for new angles to attack. Because the only thing that is certain is that what was true in the past won't be true in the future. And I think it's just a certain mindset. That's really what kind of, I think the same game parlay represents, is like constantly be looking, if you want to be, I don't even like the term like plus EV better. If you want to find terms like and ways to make money, just like look for new angles. You have to constantly be adapting. If you just get stuck in the same old ways of thought, whether they're old, they're new, it's not going to work. You have to constantly be changing and constantly be evaluating your process. That's why I think we have such an insistence on process, because that's really what kind of plays out over the long run and allows you to be profitable.
Exactly. And one of the older kind of legacy bettors out there, Bet Chris, who I'm a big fan of. He was actually posting something similar along these lines. Maybe this topic wasn't necessarily the catalyst for this commentary, but he was generally saying the same thing: is you have to adjust every single year. Process needs to change. In fact, again, betting maxims need to evolve, in fact, over time. And you can't just continue to hold on to those things. And there's a certain group of influential bettors out there with platforms that continue to pound the table on this old school sports betting school of thought and basically denigrate anybody out there who disagrees with them, bullies them, humiliates them. You're an idiot if you don't agree with them. It's something I strongly disagree with. I think I've probably tweeted a few times and then get the cathartic release of posting a tweet and then delete it and be like, that's too mean, or I'm being an asshole, or
no, I hear that. But look, I think it's important to always be adapting to new information.
All right. So for those watching the stream or watching on YouTube post-mortem, we have our live bets streaming down there in the ticker. I do want to just go over a few of these before we move on to our drive quality scoreboard. Then we'll go into the market consensus rankings and then preview week 14 and some of our mistakes and where we think we are on target. One of the things, obviously, Jaguars is one of our biggest losers. We took Jaguars plus 6.5, plus 8, minus 2.5, plus 250. Those obviously all blew up. We also took the Jags in Circa, once again getting buried by the Jags, probably. And again, they still continue to rank relatively high on drive quality and a bunch of other advanced metrics that say they're clearly a better team.
Well, they're trending in the wrong direction.
Suggests, but trending in the wrong direction. Yeah, and we do need to take a little bit more of a focus on too when we're looking at teams. And I know we do from time, but we haven't been like super consistent in doing it. But yeah, looking at like the rolling last 5 weeks of performance, rolling last 3 weeks of performance. This is something we talked a lot about in the offseason, but we just haven't put into practice as consistent as we should. But the net result is once again getting buried by the Jags. It's happened probably 10 weeks this season, and I really hope that there's a way. I don't know how to prevent something like that happening in the future, like where you just get tied so much to a particular team. You continue to think there's value. Who knows? Maybe there actually has been value on them, and literally we're just getting ridiculously unlucky. But there's some games that they're not even in.
Yeah, this was certainly one of them. The defense couldn't get a stop. And what's a little frustrating for me, I actually noticed when I was compiling some graphs about how teams have performed the last 4 weeks, I was like, most teams look exactly the same, but there are a few exceptions, and the Jaguars defense was one of them. But I just wrote it off, and I didn't actually do much careful analysis there. And then as it's happening, it's like, how did I not take this into consideration? How did I ignore this one piece, which was like obviously so important? And that was the story of the game. They didn't get a stop the entire game.
Yeah, and that's actually what actually prevented us from potentially leaning even further. And once it got out to the plus 1400s, plus 14 and a half, because man, plus 14 and a half looks juicy. You would have lost even more money. But one of the things that was keeping us off that is we were looking through the play-by-play, and it's like they have not stopped the Lions once. And this was like 6 or 7 drives into the game. And we need to see at least one stop. We need to see at least they're going to provide at least some sort of resistance. And it never materialized. So I think that was a good observation to at least prevent us from losing even more money. Another huge, brutal loser that I do like. This one I like, and I'm totally fine with losing these. Jets minus 6.5, plus 320, plus 6.5, plus 14.5, plus 100, plus 440 on the money line. And I think a smattering of a few others, quarter unit bets and things like that deep out of the money that actually did end up cashing, in fact. So all these didn't even necessarily even lose. The 6.5 and the 14.5 all hit. But man, it just would have been a waterfall of profits if the Jets would have come back and win that game. And we're in position to multiple times.
Just inability to score from within the red zone is detrimental and unbelievably frustrating. I also was a Garrett Wilson touchdown away from cashing another one of those same game parlays.
Same.
No, but I'm happy with that process. But the asymmetric risk involved, which is like we put ourselves in a position where we lost a little, but we would have won a lot more if only one small thing went right. It's not as if it's like a matter of so many things needed to happen in order to make a lot of money. But it was the opposite, right? They needed to convert on one of those last two drives at the end. That's what it came down to. Whatever. It's like they were clearly in a position to win, and that's good value. And the asymmetric risk involved and the output, if they would have converted on those drives, would have been enormous. And that's exactly what you're looking for as a bettor.
Yeah, and that's exactly how you want to evaluate the efficacy of a bet, is not just on the outcome, the result, the process.
Yeah, and I will.
Were you in position?
Yeah, I will add, there was some pushback in the chat, which is good. This is exactly what I want to encourage and forces on what do you see in the Jets. Yeah. And you almost have to force me to articulate exactly the case, which, as I said, I don't trust the Vikings offense to extend. And the Jets offense has been moving the ball fine. And like historically, the Vikings have been brutal with leads.
Actually, those three factors are actually the types of factors, even now that you articulate it, is the three factors that I feel like thematically we are always looking for when trying to really push into a live bet. There's one, the opponent is vulnerable. Two, the team that we're trying to bet on is moving the ball, but just not scoring points.
Yeah.
And then two, has demonstrated an ability to do so in the past.
So that's the key. It's like building in almost that prior based on a longer form data, and then having your own eyes inform the experience of what's actually happening. Yeah. Where you almost have a better framework of evaluating a live bet based on what happens before the game, and you like see it happening in real time, and that's when you can almost have confidence triggering a bet like that.
Yeah. Our game trade, live betting series every single Sunday, like Judah mentioned. Again, we had some pushback on some of the trades that we made, which again is great because it forces us to rethink why we're doing something and maybe back off or maybe attack it in a different angle. And others, again, in there contributing ideas. In fact, I wish we would have had, as I was mentioning to you earlier, I wish we would have had an even more successful live betting week, because this was one of our biggest audience that we've had over the course of the season. We had over 100 unique people join. We had 20 plus people in there at a time. We had 5, 6, 7, 8 active chatters in there. So it was super entertaining, super engaging, despite not, again, getting the best P&L.
That's right. But I will say, and this is a bit off topic, there's a distinct feeling, especially when I was mostly playing daily fantasy, where it was emotionally exhausting after a long Sunday of ups and downs. But aside from coming to terms and learning with the proper emotional balance, it's just you leave the stream every Sunday and you're like, man, that was such a fun time. Yeah, I love that. It was awesome. And the sweats are great. The tilts are great. And then at the end of the day, exchanging ideas and watching football together is the best part. And I encourage everyone to join us, to trade with us, to pitch ideas. It's so much fun.
Yeah, and we're always going to be looking for new ways to improve the experience, improve the stream. What we did add as a new element this week was our live scoring bot that we had in the chat. That was super cool. And now thinking about how can we get maybe injuries and turnovers in there. We got some of that feedback from some of our viewers. We're open ears. And that's why we love people joining too. We're a small platform. We're a small brand. We're at the very beginning stage, our upwards ascent. And hey, you're the OGs here. I know we already have Arjun, Dan, Darnell, some of the faces that are jumping in every single week. Appreciate those guys immensely.
That's right.
Okay. And then lastly, on the live betting front, just from a recap of the bets that we made and whatnot, the Dolphins was another big loser. Dolphins -2.5 plus 260. Dolphins -9.5 plus 440. So we were leaning into some deep out of the money alts that were going to really be lottery ticket plays.
That one fell flat on its face. I still love that play. Which is given the situation, and it didn't even turn out. The result wasn't great, and Tua stunk.
And again, even despite the bad game, I mean, they were in position to. That's why we're on our heels the whole time, because the Dolphins were never out of it until the very end.
It's true, and it was look, Tua kept on missing throws. Jeff Wilson was wide open for an 80-yard touchdown. Looks very different. Brock Purdy made an unbelievable throw on 3rd and 11, seeing the blitz. It was the third quickest pass. It was the third quickest time to throw of any pass in the NFL season. He got rid of it in 1.6 seconds. It was a dime. Credit to him. You would assume that Mr. Irrelevant's not going to be throwing dimes on 3rd and 12. But that's the life of a bettor. I think you stick to your guns. It's going to happen, even if the results there don't show for it. And at the end of the day, the beauty of betting is that you put your money where your mouth is, and you'll be dead if you're wrong. You'll be out of money. You put your money where your mouth is, and if you're successful, that speaks for itself.
Yeah. And then I do want to close on a successful bet that we had over the course of the day was the Chiefs-Bengals game. Took some Chiefs +3 that ended up pushing, but really leaned into the Chiefs +7. So a little bit early to the trade. Again, but no harm, no foul. Took a little bit of Chiefs money line as well that ended up losing.
I had Bengals money line also.
Also came back on the other side and was able to hedge some of that. I got Bengals +3 +107 that we threw in there. So really threaded the needle on that one. And I was articulating this kind of live, which was like betting the Chiefs money line. I felt like a little bit uneasy on it. And I know, because we were saying like, oh, we could look back on this and say, oh, this was like such a slam dunk. It was so easy. And like in the moment, we're like, this does not feel easy. Even the Chiefs +3, like didn't feel easy. But when the Chiefs 7 showed up, that was like, no, boom, gotta hammer that. And in fact, that was the biggest single trade net dollar risk that I know I had out there. And that was nice. And that was one of the most successful trades and covered, again, a lot of those losses. And as we've talked about before, again, we didn't hit 50% this week, but we never hit 50% in almost any week. And even the bets that I articulated, we lost a ton. And we only won a few, but those few make up for almost all the rest due to the plus money elements and other aspects of it. And we can skate by with 35%, 40%.
Yeah.
And that's why even sometimes when we have really good weekends, it's like at the end of it, I feel like, oh, that probably wasn't that good. And then you wait
do the accounting and you're like, oh my God, I'm up.
Yeah. It's like, wow, that was like a +10 unit. Yeah, I felt like I lost every other bet. Okay, so let's move on to our week 13 drive quality. Anything stick out here? I posted this a couple days ago. Some of the stuff that stuck out to me was some of the big rallies that we saw.
Yeah.
And there was only a handful of them, as we talked about, because there really wasn't that much volatility this week. But one of them that there was, in fact, that we didn't make money on, it's a little bit snoozed on it a bit, was Bears-Packers. So Packers time-weighted average margin, all right, was -5 points. Time-weighted average win probability was 33%. And yet nonetheless came back, won the game, and winning it in our drive quality scoreboard tells us that they did justifiably win that game. 28 earned points to Bears 24 earned points.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. A couple more that were really interesting. The Cowboys scored a bunch of defensive touchdowns, and they still had 48 earned points. That was very surprising to me. And also, Bengals winning by 7 against the Chiefs, like they had their way. And then the Raiders-Chargers looks like a blowout, even though the Chargers were driving with 3 minutes left in position to possibly tie or win that game. But the fundamentals certainly tell a different story.
Yeah. And in fact, this drive quality scoreboard from the Raiders-Chargers, again, Raiders 30, Chargers 14, that actually does reflect how I felt about that game. Like, we did lean into some Chargers, but it felt, man, like they're constantly in 3rd and long. They're constantly in bad positions. The Raiders is just like shredding them on the ground. And it ended up coming down to a 1-possession game, but that should not be your takeaway from the game. Like the Chargers have some serious issues here.
Yeah.
And so we look at the earned points over realized -5.6 points. They actually scored almost a full touchdown more than they actually earned in this game.
Yeah.
Actually, the only other one that I would call out is Browns-Texans. Then 17 earned points to the Browns 10.
Did they have? I don't think they had an offensive touchdown.
No, and just another further metric to flesh out how this game played out, which was the final score says the Browns blew them out. The Browns covered the 7.5-point spread, but the time-weighted average margin was still just 3 points. The time-weighted average win probability was just 58% for the Browns.
Yeah.
Remember, the Browns were losing this game for a meaningful amount of the game, and we were hesitant to even try to get in and actually bet any Browns. I felt bad about that because I felt like there was going to be a certain point in time for one reason or another that just due the futility of the Texans, that the Browns, and we saw Watson make some bad mistakes, some bad throws, some hesitation, taking some bad sacks, just typical Watson, even probably compounded, but he did make some good plays. And I think that was enough to open the door to say, hey, the Browns went all the way down to essentially like -1.
Yeah.
At that risk profile, it was worth rolling the dice on some Browns. And so I think we left some money on the table there.
Yeah, that's fair.
Washington and the Giants went to OT and tied. from our drive quality scoreboard perspective, would say that we give the dub to the Giants.
Barely.
Giants but barely. 23 earned points to the Washington's 22. Also had a +1 time-weighted average margin as well, and time-weighted average win probability of 64%. So the Giants were in better position to really win that game, and probably a little bit more positives to take away for the Giants from that matchup. Okay, so let's go into our Week 14 consensus market power rankings. Top 5, Bills, Cowboys up to number 2, up 1 spot. Chiefs down 1 spot, now to 3. Eagles 4, Bengals 5. And then to round out the top 10, we got Niners, Dolphins, Bucs, Vikings, Ravens. And then the Browns up 1 spot to number 11, just barely not sneaking in to the top 10. How are you thinking about this?
I'd still put the Chiefs at number 1. I am surprised a bit by the Dolphins not being downgraded. I assumed the market would react to that, especially the offense didn't look particularly good. I guess it's surprising because, again, when you look at the top 10 and then you look at the 11 through 15, it's who else is going to replace them? There are just so few good teams.
Yeah. We look at the bottom, Texans, again, a consensus 32nd worst team, Bears 31st, Panthers 30th, Rams 29th, Colts 28th. From a drive quality perspective, we got the Bills, Eagles, Chiefs, Cowboys, Bengals, top 5. We've been super hot on the Bengals. And now, again, this is one of those things where it's, now it seems so obvious. Joe Burrow's a top 5 quarterback. He got so much better this year. Something that you were calling out, explicitly pounding the table in our preseason previews around how Joe Burrow could take a massive leap from year 2 to year 3. And the Bengals really probably bottomed, I would say probably week 2, because that would seem like it was absolute
lost to the Steelers, lost to the Cowboys, lost to the Cooper Rush Cowboys. It speaks to how short-term volatility exists in football.
Yeah, and also, again, keeping your outlook on the longer term.
Exactly.
Again, because we've actually made a lot of good money betting on the Bengals, betting on the Bengals coming down. In fact, I think in the offseason, we could do some reverse engineering and look at attribution analysis around what drove a lot of our best live bets. I guarantee you it's probably Bengals.
Yeah.
Potentially Chiefs as well. But Bengals, the market sells off on them even in game.
Yeah.
And you can get them at amazing prices.
Yeah.
And we've been doing that a lot this season.
I think the Bengals also, it's important to recognize, right? You shouldn't just categorize all change and saying, I'm going to abandon my thesis here or I won't abandon my thesis here. It's a matter of you came in with a prior, right? That was developed. And when the Bengals start 0-2, was it because the offensive line was really struggling and Joe Burrow was taking sacks? As if that wasn't already built in, right? It's you have to do a thorough analysis to break down what went wrong and is that actually new information or not. And the Bengals are a great example because something we specifically highlighted was that the offensive line is going to take weeks because it's so new and they lack the continuity. It's going to take weeks if it's going to come together, and it might come together later on in the season, right? And Joe Burrow is going to take sacks. That's part of the picture. If Joe Burrow regressed, that's a different story. But if you pay attention to the long-term outlook and realize that things can happen in the short term, don't lose sight of that long-term vision. It's essential, and it's been extremely profitable here, and in many cases.
Again, the Bengals have been dealing with a plethora of injuries as well.
Yeah,
and nonetheless overcome. And yeah, I think that's a great call out around the efficacy of the offensive line this season. So coming into the season, all right, the ceiling scenario, the best case outcome is, wow, this offensive line comes in, it's a rejuvenated offensive line, much better players, much higher ceiling, and they perform awesome right off the bat.
Yeah.
That's the best case scenario. That's not the base case scenario.
Yeah.
A lot of the markets and a lot of handicappers and certainly a lot of fans, base case scenario, that didn't materialize. So it's, whoa, something else is wrong here. Maybe it's Joe Burrow, or maybe the offensive line is just not ever going to come together. They're not going to have the right chemistry.
Players are not Madden grades where you sign a 92 and they all of a sudden start playing like a 92 in week 1. It's a lot more complex than that. And
now also, though, too, I'm getting a little bit cautious on Bengals now because now they're red hot, sky high, and the market's fully appreciated it.
I want to call out, Zach Taylor's done a terrific job this year. I think
he's not done a bad job. I'll say that.
No, I think he's done a terrific job.
Okay.
And really, what sold it for me is that 3rd and 11 was the final straw of just like aggressive play call.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like this team is.
I don't know if I necessarily want to attribute to Zach Taylor though.
They were whatever. I don't care. I don't care if it's Zach Taylor. I don't care if it's the offensive coordinator. I care about what's going to happen now. And whatever it is, I don't feel hampered by the coaching decisions of the Bengals like I would in any other.
That's true. That's fair. Because regardless of what the source of that decision making was, this is going to be the outcomes. If this is how decisions are going to be made within the organization, then that's a plus.
Exactly. I don't care who's actually the operative. I care about what's going to happen.
Trying to think about, is the market getting a little bit too hot on the Bengals now? Because basically everyone's riding them now. Is something that I saw Timo post was future strength of schedule for passing offenses over the final 5 weeks of the season. And we see Bengals, some of the more prolific offenses that we've seen, Dolphins, Bengals, Bills, Seahawks, Raiders, all having much more difficult strengths of schedule for the passing game over the next couple of weeks. So that could also be a headwind at minimum for the Bengals. So elsewhere, some of the biggest changes this week. Again, not a lot of changes, not a lot of movement.
It's week 14, right? Like that's the thing. It's like the betting season works on 3 seasons, where it's first 3 to 4 weeks are like a matter of like really testing your off-season priors. And like I can get really crazy next year in doing that. And in the middle weeks of the season, like 5 to week 12, it's like you have a good sense of who the teams are, how good they are, but it's still like a push and pull where it's, was this because of matchup? Like there's a small sample size, we don't really know who's good. And like by week 13, week 14, like we know who's good, we know who the good pass defenses are, we know who the good run defenses are, we know who the good run games are. That's why you're not going to have as many changes, and we saw that last week with fewer week to week changes. And now it's just a matter of executing. And I think the focus should be less on fundamentals, almost because there's less edge, and more, okay, what particular matchup, what particular angle within how these two teams play, and that's the biggest source of value.
And also, like we mentioned earlier, was trying to look at recent performance. So how these teams have evolved. But again, you want to balance the two. And this is why when you think about priors as well, like you have to also think about evaluating team. And we've mentioned this in different ways, shapes, or form. But especially when I think about in my day job, working in investments and how we structure our trades and the positionings that we have in our broader portfolio, all right, it's angled from strategic and tactical. All right, so you have your strategic views, all right, your longer term macro views that you think will play out over time. And there's going to be some noise here and there and in between, but you think there's one general direction of a particular asset. And then there's tactical views, all right? So views that I think this is going to work for the next 2 weeks, for the next 2 days, maybe the next month. And then after that, like my visibility ends, and I just know I want to take advantage of it for this short period of time, relative to this longer term view that I have, and balancing those two things. But I think that's something, it's a nuance that I feel like most handicappers out there, certainly most sports betting commentators out there, miss when they're talking about betting priors and how that's playing into power rank.
That's a good call out. It's actually something I'm going to focus on the note that will come out tomorrow. That balances those two things.
So some of the biggest changers on the week 14 basis, the Lions changed the most, upgraded 3 spots to a market rank of 21st. Look at drive quality.
Yeah, I keep on noticing this, by the way.
Yeah, and they've been moving up fast up the power rankings. And I've seen a lot of tweets and whatnot. And I responded to some of them this week around how are the Lions favorites over the Vikings? Oh, when we look at our drive quality power rankings, the Lions are 9th, the Vikings are 10th.
Yep.
The Lions are at home. So, I mean, it's like, this seems like actually kind of, okay.
Exactly the price.
Yeah, it sounds about right. Yeah. And I guess it's such a huge off-market view as well, because drive quality 9th, again, broader market power rank for the Lions is 21st. And in fact, no one's really even close to us. Football Outsiders has the Lions ranked 13th. That's a market high outside, again, of
and I
quality.
Another thing I want to test this off season to see which model or brand most closely resembles drive quality. And I think based on just from what I've seen doing these kind of recaps as Football Outsiders.
Yeah, that's been my anecdotal experience as
well.
Yeah,
although like, they're clearly outliers, like the Vikings. Football Outsiders 20, Draft Quality 10.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would give them the benefit of the doubt for it as well, as they were very early to riding the Seahawks success, which, again, have been resistant to riding early on, at least. But again, that wasn't something that we held on to very long. We were very quick to adapt.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to use that as I thought I was going on for too long about the Bengals. But it's not just, you're saying that because you have the benefit of the doubt and hindsight and like you just stick to your priors. No, it changed really quickly on the Seahawks. And like I went out and said my favorite bet of the season, and it's still my favorite bet of the season, was Seahawks Bucs.
Yeah.
Which is funny the way it turned out.
Yeah. Also, that's always like sometimes, and again, this is just anecdotal as well, but sometimes when I feel like just like crazy confidence on something, like anytime I would ever frame something as this is my favorite bet of the entire year, especially pregame, is I might be missing something because like usually I don't have that sort of conviction.
Yeah. I've been fading the Bucs
successfully, yes.
At such success that I think the thesis just happened to not materialize that 1 week. And that's also a good reminder of didn't break the bank. I didn't bet, that much more than I usually do.
Bet sizing.
Anything also. Like that's a situation where you have two options. You can either scale your bet. You can say, I usually bet $100, but now I'm going to bet $1,000. Or you could move the lines and get crazy on the alternate side. And so I'm still going to bet the same amount, but I'm confident this outcome will happen, so I'll move the price. Exactly. That's a totally different way of approaching it.
Yeah. No, again, all you're doing is, and that's actually a good way to put it, is if you actually have a lot of conviction, doesn't mean, you want to then increase your risk. All you likely do is you actually narrow the outcome of what you're looking for. So you have such high conviction in a very particular outcome that, in fact, you'll scale most of your bets into that outcome specifically.
Exactly. Like Jalen Hurts, perfect example, right? If I was right, the more right I was, the more money I make. You're minimizing risk. When you have high conviction, you want to maintain that same upside and minimize risk. It's like investing 101.
That's why in order for you to capitalize on a view, on a particular forecasted game script materializing, you could bet the spread. And then you win a bet just like you win any other bet. But then you've left a ton of money on the table, especially if the game realizes exactly as forecast. Dude, like that's only going to happen so many times in the season. And you need to make sure you squeeze as much juice out of that as possible. And you don't leave any money on the table. I was mad that I ended up taking Ravens live plus 5.5, which ended up doing nothing for me. Like in the last drive or two, you could already see. Like the 5.5 wasn't going to do anything. I should have just taken the money line. It was like plus 140. I saw a little bit of safety in the plus 5.5. But again, it was a relatively low conviction. But that's the type of thing that you want to position yourself. Like, if you're going to be right, make sure you're getting as much money out of it as possible. Especially the bets that we take. Again, the win percentage is low. And so you need to make sure that the return is high for the ones that you do win. Last thing on the market power rankings, biggest divers of the week. Titans downgraded 3 spots. Chargers downgraded 3 spots. Now to a market rank of 22nd. Really in free fall. Jets down a little bit, down 2 spots to 17th. Jaguars also in free fall, down another 2 spots, now down to a market rank of 24th. Drive quality still hanging on, 13th. But he is still a market high on the Jags.
Right. And again, drive quality has been carrying the warning signs of a collapsing defense.
Yeah. One of the things I did want to call out was drive quality has been super sour on the Bucs all season and continue to be. So we got the Bucs ranked 18th, by far a market low. The next closest brand to us is PFF and Football Outsiders at 11th. So material difference there. And this is one of the things that's kept us from not only not losing any money on the Bucs, but taking advantage and actually been fading the Bucs a lot this season. Alrighty, so let's move on to NFL Week 14. Thursday night game, Raiders-Rams. Raiders minus 6.5 on the road, 43.5 the total. It's still unclear who's going to be the starting quarterback for the Rams. I know Wofford is banged up. He's questionable. Obviously, they signed Baker Mayfield. Can imagine you'd see him.
He's not playing. Yeah.
And then Bryce Perkins. I think there's a big difference between Perkins and Wofford, especially obviously their style of play. If it's Perkins, I'm just laying off. I have no opinion. But if it is Wofford, I think there's some value on the Rams at 6.
No. Watford's terrible.
You didn't like what you saw versus...
He was dreadful.
No, but I'm saying from the team in general versus
they were
the
plucky.
Seahawks.
They're very plucky. I'll give them credit for that. I don't know. I had a feeling in my bad knee that they were going to show up for that game. I have no good reason why, which is like why I didn't really lean into the Seahawks. But again, this is the team so devoid of talent. I can't bet on them.
So that doesn't mean, I guess, that you're interested in the Raiders.
No, I think I'm going to play another one of these same game parlays only because the matchup against the Rams is really perfect, I think. Considering that Josh Jacobs has had enormous run. He's hurt. It's a short week. The Rams have a really good run defense, not a particularly good pass defense. I'll take a little bit of like Derek Carr to hit his passing props and the Raiders to cover 2.5. I can probably get that like plus 130, 140, something like that.
Yeah, I really like trying to find for these standalone games some like juicy bets to make the game fun, especially when it's not even really a good matchup. But we know a lot of us just love football, and we'll watch. If there's a game, we'll watch it.
So, I also like this bet.
And so there will be bets.
Yeah.
And so we might as well try to help make at least some fun ones,
I'll
and hopefully some profitable ones.
Yeah, I'll be playing that. The Carr to hit his passing prop, Raiders to get most of the way to cover, just because of the matchup. But it's betting on the Rams, not sexy right now.
Definitely not sexy. And no one else is doing it. In fact, according to, again, there's some questions around betting splits. I looked at betting splits across like various brands today. And it's just like a specific example. I looked at PFFs. I looked at pre-games. I looked at Action Networks. I looked at DraftKings. I looked at some kind of private pick'em pools that I looked at to see how people were allocating their picks. And pretty much all the percentages are different. But the direction of them is typically the same. So that's why like the percentages aren't really that like important and don't necessarily give you a lot of insight there. But for those who like completely dismiss betting splits as if the direction of it is useless, I totally disagree with that. I find a lot of insight in it. And so basically what we can take from this is the people making bets on this game are pretty decisively on the Raiders side. 68% of bets, 79% of the handle on DraftKings on the Raiders side, and kind of looking at a host of others. Again, the clearly leaning on the Raiders side as well for exactly some of the reasons that you probably talked about, which is the Rams are just so unpalatable. They're one of those teams that if you're going to bet the Rams, you really have to hold your nose on this.
Which
and
doesn't
it's not going to be fun.
Yeah. I'm not betting this spread. I'm taking a totally different approach. So
makes sense. Jets at Buffalo. Jets minus 9.5, total 44. I really like the Jets here. I don't know if I'm missing something. On first blush, this seems 3 points too high.
I agree. Especially, I like to talk about points existing in two spheres. One is like a reflection of a fundamental value, and two is like points in an actual game. Like the Jets defense is still good. They're healthy. And the Bills offense has not been the same since Josh Allen's injury. And they're still lacking in secondary weapons. The Jets are built to stop the Bills. They can get pressure and they can play good coverage. Mike White's competent enough. The Bills defense, especially now with Von Miller after the season with the torn ACL, it's very beatable. We've seen that the past couple of weeks. I think the spread is way too high.
According to PFF, again, 82% of the cash on the Bills. 61% of the tickets on the Jets. What are you looking at from a live perspective?
It's going to be Josh Allen. Right? Does the Bills offense have the rhythm, the downfield passing game going? Like when Josh Allen threw deep against the Jets the first time, it was a disaster. And I mean, the Jets have typically gotten off to slow starts. So I'd definitely be looking if the Bills score early to hop on. That's when you can get to 10.5. Like lines for big favorites love to move in their direction early. This line can go to 13.5 if the Bills get the ball first and score a touchdown. Yeah, that's a buy.
If the Jets get the ball first and go not even just 3 and out, but just don't score, it's going to go to 10.5.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think this is going to be critical. What I'm going to be looking for is, are the Jets playing competently? Because the types of mistakes, bad play calling in the red zone that they did versus the Vikings, they can get away with it and still potentially be competitive. You're not going to be able to like dick around with the Bills in that way.
You'll get buried. But I have faith in the offensive staff.
Okay. Browns minus +6 on the road at the red hot Cincinnati Bengals, over under 47.5. Deshaun Watson looked really bad
but that should be almost priced in. They're like, we knew he'd be rusty. That's another reason why I don't want to touch the game. If there's
I think he's going to be rusty again, multiple games.
Yeah, so then you should probably be betting the Bengals. Right,
I'm cautious on the Bengals as well, just because I know the market is sky high in them right now, and I know the last time the Bengals, and again, I don't want to like tie too much into the last time they played and use that as the lone signal, but the Bengals did not look good versus the Browns when they played earlier this season. That was a terrible game. It was probably one of the worst games that they played all season.
I think Deshaun Watson's way too much of a question mark. It wouldn't be totally shocking to see him play well. It also wouldn't be shocking to see like the disastrous performance that was last week. And again, if we see the same sort of lack of rhythm, lack of timing, which is what was plaguing him, it's like holding the ball too long in the pocket, then I think I would definitely jump on the Bengals live. Again, Bengals are a team that starts slow.
Yeah, and just looking at on the screen here, just how bad Watson played versus the Texans. -5 EPA, 0.2 EPA per play. Again, my forecast would be that Watson's gonna stink again and be just good enough to put together a good throw here or there to keep the optimists' blood pumping. But beyond that, it's gonna be bad. Texans 17 at Dallas. I've seen it breach the 17 down to 16.5 on DraftKings right now, 45.5. Probably.
The only thing I'll add, just as contextual notes, is that as we saw on Sunday Night Football, Dallas does pour it on, or at least stays aggressive late in games. So even though they are a run-first team at this point, they pass plenty late in games. They're aggressive, so I wouldn't be too worried off the 17, but I don't really want to be betting games with the 17-point spread.
If you want to bet the Cowboys, then you bet the Cowboys alt line -23.5.
Yeah. And like even still,
and get a nice like plus 250 or something. I think if the Cowboys are going to blow them out, they're going to blow them out.
Yeah. I prefer to build particular game stories here. This just seems like a good same game parlay type game. Yeah. Tony Pollard breaks off a couple big runs, or they like ride Zeke in this spot. It's just, I'd rather approach it that way.
Minnesota plus 2.5 on the road versus Detroit. Again, this one of those games generating some of the most buzz of any game this week. Everyone again scratching their heads. Why is Detroit -2.5? Drive quality has Detroit 9th, Minnesota 10th. Yeah. Makes perfect sense to us.
Yep.
I probably like the Lions here. I think it's again probably a game that you could probably live bet and probably get the Lions at even a better price.
Oh, it's definitely a live bet game. Also, just like explosive offenses, bad defenses. The Lions are healthy now. Amon-Ra St. Brown is just a machine, especially on late downs and in key spots. I posted a chart about it on, I think, last week, just about like how his production on third downs. But it's like 3rd and 9, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 15 yards every time. But, all right, and he was hurt, and that's really when their offense struggled. Jameson Williams is back. DJ Chark is back. DJ Chark adds a vertical threat that they did not have earlier in the season. And DeAndre Swift has like some insane splits on versus off the injury report, and he was finally off the injury report last week. With that said, I think the Vikings have almost, from a market standpoint, it's gotten out of control. Oh, they're 10-2, but they're frauds type thing.
Yeah.
Like, the Vikings are exactly who we thought they were.
One of the most stable teams. We've been talking about this the whole season.
I've been saying it for weeks, and that's good enough in this NFC environment to sneak out with a 10-2. But like, they're still stable, they're still good, and like we know it's the same team that in spots in the past 4 years. Like we've seen this script so many times. I just think I have a pretty good sense of what the Vikings are. How that like manifests week to week is a totally different question.
People are bidding on the Vikings despite the line moving in the opposite direction. 72% of the bets, 60% of the handle on the Vikings, according to DraftKings betting splits. But I looked at, again, the betting splits across various vendors and platforms all have most of the bets coming in on the Vikings. Ravens, plus 2.5 at Pittsburgh. 37 is the total. Very low. Obviously, no Lamar Jackson. We don't like Pittsburgh, but we've been warming up.
Yep.
I've been super cold on a team like the Ravens. Squeaked it out versus the Broncos on one of the final plays of the game. Obviously, much tougher defense. This is going to be another good live bet game.
The Steelers' offense isn't great. Their defense is not as dreadful as they were without TJ Watt. It's ugly.
The Steelers play well. Like, that's their forte, is to win these like ugly games, and especially at home. The line's plummeted as it's become clear that Lamar Jackson was definitely not going to play in this game. And they already had a very hampered offense. As many kind of anti-superlatives that you want to bring to the table on the Steelers offense, they've certainly been getting better. And they do just enough. And Kenny Pickett is going to continue to mature, just like you would expect from any rookie quarterback on a game-by-game basis. You can't have a very static perspective in this offense. I would potentially be looking into, this is probably not like a super sharp observation. It's probably pretty square. But George Pickens shooting his mouth off this week, I was observing it and documenting it and talking about it pretty much all Sunday when we were looking at props, that George Pickens wasn't getting any targets and wasn't getting any catches even.
Yeah.
And he has been very vocal this week. That happened, and he doesn't want that to happen anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So potentially look at, are they going to potentially try to force the ball to him in some way?
The squeaky wheel.
Chiefs -8.5 at Denver. Always struggle versus Denver on a season by season basis. 44.5, the total, very high total for a Broncos game.
They're missing Courtland Sutton. They're so bad right now. I think the Chiefs are going to get their 27 points or whatever, and I don't see the Broncos keeping up with more than 14 or so. Well, I like the Chiefs here. I don't see what angle is there to buy the Broncos other than throw your hands up and say they can't possibly be this bad. Like, our draft quality has them as the worst offense in the league.
82% of the bets, 79% of the handle, according to DraftKings, on the Chiefs. No one wants to touch the Broncos. Just lean into a potential alt. If the Broncos are really going to just be putrid, all right, the offense is not going to do anything. And if there's going to be any team that breaks the back of the Broncos defense, in the sense of true throw your hands up, like F this, it could be the Chiefs this week. And so leaning in to a Chiefs -16.5.
The Mahomes passing props, I mean, they might be at such a premium, but I'm going to guess if it's 8.5, it's projecting a downgrade because of the Broncos defense, and I want to sell that angle.
Yeah. Although, again, I think the total at 44, again, especially for a Broncos game, that is pricing in a lot of a Chiefs offensive premium scoring there. But again, that's also pricing in then essentially what? That the Broncos are still going to put on the board 2 touchdowns. Leaning into Chiefs alts, Chiefs, yeah. Props is the way to play this one. My Panthers at Seattle -4.5, 44.5. Sam Darnold, off the bye, rejuvenated, refreshed, healthy as ever, versus a vulnerable offense. Again, in a difficult environment. This is another one that I would probably like to lean in the alt. I'd rather take Panthers -2.5 or Seahawks -9.5.
This is also kind of a game where the wheels can come off for Darnold.
Think so?
Yeah, just in that environment.
It's a bad environment, but it's not necessarily like an opportunistic.
So the Seahawks, the defense is going to be good if they can generate some pressure. If they can't, they're very beatable. But Gino's also still playing at a pretty good. He slowed down a bit, but he's been terrific. He was awesome on Sunday. It's well documented at this point that it's relatively sustainable.
Yeah, you can't still be arguing it against it here in week 14.
Exactly. But there's still this hesitancy to buy the Seahawks, and I think they clearly have the better offense.
Clearly have the better offense, sure. But
and I also wonder if Kenneth Walker's not playing, how much that tilts them to the pass. This is an interesting conversation of how the run-pass ratios look. There are a lot of question marks in this game, and I think fewer answers that pregame give me an angle to bet it one way or another.
Yeah, Pete Carroll surprised me this year. I know there's been a lot of positive things said about their OC this year as well, being responsible for some of the rejuvenation in the offensive game and not being as stubborn about forcing the run game like a Pete Carroll offense typically has done. And that was one of the reasons why I've been off and wrong early on the Seahawks, was because, again, I thought that there was going to be more of that Carroll-led stubbornness in forcing the run, no matter the situation, no matter the context.
Yeah.
But in any case, the Panthers defense is awesome. 81% of the bets on the Seahawks. Everyone loves the Seahawks. Super easy case to be made. But 44, this actually could be quite high. In fact, especially if you think that Sam Darnold could potentially struggle even versus a bad defense, unless he's giving up fumble sixes and pick sixes. Under 44, potentially alt under playing this game is something I think could be potentially effective.
No, I like that.
Bucs at San Francisco, minus 3.5 Niners, over under 37. Led by, again, Brock Purdy. Are we going to get similar performance, or is that kind of a one-off, came in, defense couldn't adjust?
As much as I hate the Bucs, I don't think the Niners are a buy here. And also, there's almost like this assumption that the Niners are going to slow down the Bucs, but because of how bad the Bucs, they can't get much worse on offense. I don't think the matchup's actually so much of a downgrade relative to what their offense has been performing like, and the market's almost pricing that. Brock Purdy introduces a lot of question marks. We've seen a rookie come in one spot where the defense didn't prepare for him. I'm not sure he'll be able to have the same success. And it's 3.5. It's not a pick 'em line here. The Niners are clearly the better team, but it's not enough to trigger a bet here.
I would lean on the Bucs side in this one, especially over the field goal. I think Purdy coming in versus a vulnerable defense like the Dolphins, unprepared for him, have no real meaningful tape on him, and now the Bucs have a full game, essentially, tape on him, and it's a much better defense that I think can create some, because that's basically that whole game. We were waiting for Purdy to make a game-changing mistake, which he didn't do. So props to him. But I think he's going to look a lot different versus the Bucs defense. Another way to attack this game, especially too, would be looking at all unders. I love all unders. I understand it's already rock bottom, 37.
Yeah. Those have been the spots to capture the 26s. You've been doing that all year.
You discount 10 points off that total, you're out to plus 400. As long as you're tactical and strategic and you're doing it live, especially, you've already seen some of this game script start to materialize. That gives you a lot of edge to really be able to take advantage of some of those. And so that's something I would definitely be looking at this, especially if you get a very generous early score that kind of pushes this up above some of those kind of traditional key numbers, 40, 41, 42. That would be a chef's kiss, slam dunk, all unders, 35.5. Dolphins -3 at Chargers, at Arjun's Chargers. Arjun been dragging the Chargers through the mud this week. Rightfully.
Yep.
Is this buy the bounce back from the Dolphins here and continue to sell spiraling Chargers?
I'd like to think that the Tua game was an aberration, and I recognize my language there is very revealing. I'd like to think, which says it's an angle I'll have to bet live, but I can't really pull the trigger beforehand.
Who was arguably playing the best defense in the NFL, or maybe the top 3 defense for sure. And the NFL on the road. And yes, and he missed players, but those players were open.
Yeah. They were
still competitive.
The Chargers are weird in these spots. It's they show up on Sunday Night Football and play a great game against the Chiefs. But I don't know if the good Chargers or bad Chargers are going to show up. I do know their defense is dreadful. Passing, running, they can't get a pass rush. I think the Dolphins will be able to score, but do we have the duo from the first? It's just, again, I'd like to think it's an aberration. The fact that I'd like to think it is not enough to trigger a bet.
Yeah. And remember, we looked at our market consensus power rankings. In fact, we were surprised that the Dolphins weren't downgraded at all. And that does make a lot of sense why the Dolphins would be -3 on the road versus Justin Herbert led.
Yeah.
And cross country on the other side. This is the Sunday night game too, so does mitigate some of that element as well. Lastly, Monday Night Football, Patriots essentially pick 'em at the Cardinals. Drive Quality hates the Cardinals, has hated them all season.
Now they finally have the full roster back, right? They've got Hollywood back. They've got DeAndre Hopkins back. And what's been the kryptonite of the Patriots defense? It's scrambling quarterbacks. If Kyler's running,
good point.
I was bullish on the Cardinals long term, and this is exactly the spot I was bullish on them, which I was waiting for it to happen. I think this is the spot where it might come to fruition.
I like it. Huge coaching mismatch, but the market definitely leaning into the Patriots, according to PFF, 75% of the tickets, 70% of the cash, leaning in to the Patriots. And the Patriots, have been wishy-washy. Sometimes they look good. Sometimes they look great. Sometimes they look terrible. And as you pointed out, specifically against quarterbacks that are inclined to run, I definitely like that angle. Again, I think the coaching mismatch still makes me a little bit hesitant.
Yeah, although I think that's schematic more so than decision making, which is like perfectly covered plays against. This is the classic stat. Like the Cardinals for 2019, 2020, and 2021, all worse in the league. Kyler Murray's constantly coming for coverage. I think that's a symptom of what people point out as Cliff Kingsbury being a poor coordinator. I don't think he's been so terrible in the decision making, and Bill Belichick actually hasn't been particularly good. How the game plans work, obviously, is up for question, and that's where I think the coaching difference would mostly manifest. But that's why we bet live.
And this is going to be a difficult week. Going to be a shorter slate than typical, with 6 teams on bye: Falcons, Bears, Packers, Colts, Saints, and Washington, all on bye. So definitely this is one of those weeks that we've talked about, like a compressed schedule. All right, good stuff. Thanks everyone for listening. Please come join us on our live betting game trade stream on Sunday. Come with ideas. We're going to plan jump on at noon Eastern. And if we don't, it's my fault, since Judah wakes up at like 7 a.m.
Right. That's right. The adrenaline of a fall Sunday morning. There's nothing like it.
Yes. All right. Thanks, everyone. That's closing bell.